Hi, welcome back to Inside Great Minds with Adam Outland. You're getting this introduction from the Houston airport today, but I'm really excited to introduce you guys to Aaron Schafer. Aaron Schafer is our guest for this upcoming podcast, and an exceptional guy. He actually has been in sales leadership for his entire career, which took him to a company called Self-Publishing School, where he is now the director of sales. And Aaron's role in that company is helping individuals understand how and the strategy behind going to publish their own book. Aaron also has done this for himself. He is a published author, and we discussed in this episode the process he went through to author a book himself, how it was helpful to put himself through the process he coaches others to do. And we discussed the actual content of his book, which is called The Politically Homeless Christian. We weave in a lot of concepts in there about his faith and how there's some distilled principles around leadership that can be applied not just to politics, but also to business leadership as well. So a ton to learn from this. If you've ever thought of publishing a book, or you're just interested in a somewhat divisive topic, I think you'll really enjoy this interview with Aaron Schafer. How you and I got to know each other. You were getting your master's in mathematics, and you chose in the summer because you were at the time dating or engaged with?
By that point, we were engaged. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So your life partner that you were engaged with, she brought up this crazy book selling thing, and you're like, dude, I'm a math, like, what? Sure, yeah. Why not? I'll make it for my summer. So you did the same job knocking on doors selling educational books that I did, and that's actually where we met back in 2000. And what was your 2006, 2005?
So it would have been summer of 2004 would have been the first summer.
Yeah, so literally our first summers were together. That's crazy. Wow, that was our first summer. Okay. So that's how you and I met. And then we've had an awesome relationship since 2004. That's incredible. It's a lot.
That was quick. We're getting old, Adam. We're getting old.
So give us outside of that introduction of how you and I got to know each other and you becoming a sales manager in that organization, just real quick, what math major, what made you decide to sell books other than your fiance at the time?
Yeah, she was extremely persuasive, right? No, it's funny because she actually brought up the idea of coming out and selling books with Southwestern. She had sold, it was her third summer with my first summer. So after her first summer, she came back and told me about this life-changing experience. I grew more in 3 months and I've grown in the last 5 years, like dealing with rejection, learning how to talk with people of different backgrounds, and very nice sales pitch on why I should come sell books. And I promptly told her I had no interest in ever selling books. I would never do that. And so she was trying to get me just to come to an informational meeting, just hear about it. She was pleasantly persistent. And I said, I don't know why I would go and hear about something that I'm definitely never going to do. So we had a giant fight about it while we were dating. And she went out for a second summer. And then when she came back, I think the biggest thing that changed for me was I started to be around some of her friends that had sold books. And I saw the caliber of people that they were. And I saw some of the habits they had in their life. And I saw the attitude that they brought. Just, wherever they went, there was an energy. And so I started to realize there must be something to this thing. And simultaneously, I was planning on teaching eventually, coaching basketball. And so, I could see the value in going out and learning how to communicate with students and parents of all different backgrounds. And so ultimately it's like, I'll devote a summer to doing this. So probably a good life experience, and definitely did not plan on selling for 5 summers, becoming a district sales manager, spending 7 more years building organizations. That was definitely not on the life agenda when I came out for that first summer, but it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, it's just, the stereotype of someone who would choose to get a PhD in mathematics is not someone who has the same skill set for high-level communication skills that are required to recruit, train, and develop humans and, sell.
Yes. I was an
But,
oddball.
yeah,
There's no doubt.
what an incredible combination. I think that's great. Well, we're going to jump around and ping pong. That's how you and I met. Obviously worked together in that company a long time. You developed a lot of incredible skills doing it, but you also brought your brilliance to that organization. Fast forward all the way to like just a couple of years ago, you became the author of The Politically Homeless Christian. And I mean, it was a awesome title because especially at the time of publishing, and really honestly hasn't changed a whole lot now, that there's a lot of people that probably feel somewhat politically homeless and others that feel out of alignment. And but how did your career weave into publishing a book, which is not an easy?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I had wanted to write a book for really 20 years, all the way back to college. So going back to the kind of oddball nature, when I was in college, I had all the math and science classes I needed for my major. Every elective I took in college was writing based. And it was always pretty funny to be in those classrooms when you go around, you do introductions the first day and people are sharing their major and it's a bunch of, English lit and creative writing. And I'd be like the lone math major. And I always wanted to write a book. That was something that had been in my heart for a long time, but I had just always kind of started and stopped and never got traction. And yeah, so it'd always been there. And then ultimately we got to, pretty tumultuous season in, I would say, American politics over the last, really 10 years. And that's probably putting it lightly. And for me, it was just heartbreaking to watch in so many cases, friendships be torn apart, families be torn apart, businesses, churches. Like it's just so much strife surrounding politics. And I really saw just this root issue being that so many of us are in our echo chambers. So, you go in these silos on Facebook and Google and YouTube, and just those algorithms are so good at what they do of just saying, hey, you seem to like this content, let me feed you more of it. To the point where all of us get to the spot where we are so convinced, just utterly convinced that we are correct in every position that we hold because we're seeing nothing but evidence of that opinion. Mm. And I think we've lost the ability to have just constructive dialogue in our society. And it's not just around politics. I think around a lot of topics, we really struggle to lead with empathy and to lead with grace and to lead with intellectual curiosity. So, maybe you and I don't agree on a particular topic. I would say most of us don't even talk to people we don't agree with. We don't come and say, hey, Adam, let's talk about gun control. I know you feel the opposite of me. Let's have a dialogue. Like that is not, we're not at a dinner party discussing abortion when we're on the opposite side of, that's not what happens in our society.
Right.
Almost at all. And I would say the 5 or 10% of people that do lean into those, if I'm listening to you, I'm really just listening to find a hole in your argument to prove you wrong. I don't think that very many of us listen and to be like, man, I really want to understand why Adam feels the way he feels about gun control, because I can't fathom how he would feel that way. So I feel so different from him. But you know what? I want to understand. I want to hear his point of view. I want to understand how he got to that conclusion. Like maybe there is facts I'm unaware of. Maybe there is actually a position there, and it might not I might not go from here to here, but maybe in the middle there's a little bit of truth. And I think a lot of times in life, we have this desire, not just in politics, but we have this deep desire for things to be black and white. Like we really want things to be clear. And the unfortunate reality is in most things in life, whether it's politics, relationships, jobs, leadership, most things are pretty gray. Like most things, there's deep levels of nuance. And we live in a society today where nuance is hard. It's really hard to have nuance conversations, nuanced opinions in a world that demands kind of polarization. They really demand that you just take a stand. Here's where I'm at on everything. So that was the genesis of the book. Is I really wanted to write a book that challenged people in the way that they approach their dialogue surrounding politics. And for me, my faith is a big part of my life. And so I really wanted to do it through that lens of how can we do this better as Christians? So,
yeah. Well, man, so many comments. I mean, one is, I think to speak to the black and white part of it is I think that's how politicians, that's like the playbook. to win an election, right? If you ever think about getting into politics and you think about, well, first I got to win, I've got to be the guy in my base that wins the primary, right?
Yep.
So what do I need to say, be, and do to win the primary? And it's almost always, if you're trying to see behind the curtain, that the script writers, the people, behind the scenes writing the language, is you've got to be this is the way, my way is right. And because that shows confidence and all this stuff. Right. And then I think in some ways that does actually work, and getting people elected. But that's probably where it stops working. Right.
Yeah.
Get them elected but it doesn't necessarily win the game that matters. Right.
Yep. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and that bleeds into how that our belief system about how things need to be right and wrong and yes and no and very no grays, right? So I definitely appreciate that. How long had you been thinking about writing the book? I mean, I know a lot of people who've published, and it's man, what a journey it can be for some people and how long it can take. But how long had this idea been brewing specifically to do something in this line of work?
What's funny is in this line of work, it was so fast. It was something where I've always been interested in politics. So I'm someone that has a love-hate relationship with politics. I love to hate it, but I also am like, I can't stop consuming. I'm not a news watcher because I think that just poisons your brain. But I love reading articles. I love understanding what's going on in international policy. I like understanding the actual policy debates. I'm kind of a policy wonk in that way. And so I'd always been interested, but it had never been a book that I was considering writing. The books I was considering writing was more personal development. I had started and stopped a book called Don't Be Two. I had written a decent number of chapters on that. And it was, success habits and life things. I was actually in the middle of writing a parenting book. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. I was about 3 chapters into writing a parenting book, and it was July of 2020.
Yeah.
And it was just over that 4th of July weekend. I had an experience with an uncle. And I have a lot of uncles, so this won't give anything away because I literally have 84 first cousins. So I have, this is, yes, both my mom and dad are huge families. And so, and an uncle I love dearly, but it was but he made a comment to me of Aaron, I just can't understand. I can't understand how anyone could be Christian and be Democrat. And to me, it was, now again, I'm not a Democrat. I'm a very independent person. So this wasn't coming from some conversation where I was pitching him on being a Democrat.
Sure.
But I had that exact same conversation with other people that I knew in the last 6 months, where the opposite thing was said, which was, Aaron, I don't know how someone could possibly be Christian and be Republican in today's world. Yeah. And so I had heard both of those. And when my uncle said that, I was like, we have gone so far down this polarized rabbit hole that people, without knowing the heart of someone else, could lead to this conclusion about what they believe, what they like, just by the term Republican or term Democrat, we immediately say all of these things are true about this human being. And at that point, I was like, man, I need to write a book. So this was July 2020. And at the time, I had just started working for the company I work with now called Self-Publishing School. And I worked with one of their coaches. And they helped me get so streamlined with exactly organize my thoughts a little bit more efficiently of what was I going to write, organize it into chapters. And I'm a pretty quick writer once I can sit down and know what I'm going to write. And I actually wrote the entire rough draft in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was a sprint. And because in my mind, I was like, if I'm going to write it, I need to get this thing out ASAP. And so I went from idea of the book to actually published in about 60 days. Wow. Published on Amazon, selling. And so it was an unbelievably quick journey. Now, again, this is something that I had thought about for a long time, not writing this book, but these are topics that I've talked about and thought about forever. And so when it was finally time, it was basically, it felt like writing when you write the 10 chapters, it feels like 10 conversations you've had 100 times. And that's one of the things that I tell authors now that I coach is ultimately most of the time when we write a book, we've already written the book. we've already written the book in terms of conversations you've had over and over again with loved ones, with friends, with family.
Yeah.
Generally,
if it comes naturally, that's the case, right? If it flows the way this one did. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. And so a lot of times what we do as authors is we actually overthink the writing process. And a lot of authors make the mistake of editing while they write. So they write one chapter and then just imposter syndrome sinks in, they self-edit to death, and then they lose confidence that it'll ever be good. And they just get stuck after chapter 1, 2, 3, and they never write their book. And ultimately that's something that for me, just ripping it off like a Band-Aid made a big difference.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. I mean, at 60 days is impressively fast to me, but that's amazing. But what you're saying too is the ideas had been molded over the course of years in your mind, which is one of the reasons it came together as quickly as it did when you put pen to paper. Yeah. Love that. Just talk to me just for a second. We'll kind of, again, jump around a little bit, but the principles of the book, if you were to kind of lay those out for folks in like a very like somewhat consolidated way, like what do you think are like the top 1, 2, or 3 overarching principles that make up the politically homeless Christian that you're wanting to help people apply to their decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. And really, it is a book that I had considered writing it more, not just geared towards faith-based audience, because I do think that will apply regardless of whether or not someone's Christian or not. But I would say it was twofold in terms of the big ones. One is trying to approach not just our view of politics and of specific policies, but I would say just decisions you make in life in general, with a level of open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity that I think so often it's easy to shy away from. I think that we have a tendency to want to make fast decisions in life. And I think our Western culture promotes that. And to your point, that speaking with confidence, like we want to just have an answer. We just want to have an answer right away. And I recognize this in my own life. This was probably about, 10, 15 years ago. And you'll appreciate this, you built organizations within Southwestern. And so frequently people would say things like, oh, my mom is a CFO for this company. And they'd say it very something like, you've heard of them, right? And it'd be like some big company that I maybe should have heard of. I don't know. And there's always temptation to say something along the lines of, oh, I think so. I'm not totally, tell me more. And basically creatively dodge the fact that I have no idea what company this is. Right? Or like, you read this book. People ask about a very specific book. This is a yes, no question. Have you read this book? Like, oh man, that sounds super familiar, but I don't. And it's like, no, the answer is no. The answer is no, I've not read that book. Or like, no, I don't know. And I found that so often what was happening, it made me frustrated with my own little mini lack of integrity in those moments.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
These little and so I was like, I'm going to stop doing that. I want to be a person that my answer is always, I'm not going to ever allow you to believe something out of something I say. Even if I didn't lie, I'm not going to allow you to believe something that is untrue. And I want to become much more crisp with my language, which sounds like a funny lead into this. But what I realized was that by leaning into intellectual curiosity, I had so much better conversations with people. And so by saying like, no, I've never heard of that. Like before, tell me what they do. And like actually care, like, no, I've never read that. I've never even heard of that book. Like, what's it about? Tell me more. And I wanted to take that level of, I want to constantly be learning. And I started to apply that to things like politics, like decision-making, instead of just assuming that I was right. Because I think we all naturally assume that we're right about most things. That's our default. And there was a pivotal moment. I talked about this in the book, was in leading up to the 2008 election. I did a very, very, very difficult exercise with myself.
Yeah.
Which was, I just took top 10, 15 hot button issues that we hear a lot about, gun control, abortion, gay marriage, immigration, healthcare, like just all these like really hot button topics. And I sat down and said, I'm going to take at least an hour with each of these leading up to the election.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask myself the question, what do I truly believe about these? And why? Because in some cases, if I was like, yep, So take gun control as an example. And this is not, don't worry, this isn't going to be here's why people should feel X, Y, and Z about gun control. But for me, I asked myself, okay, let's actually start from the top. And this is an exercise I would encourage every person to do, is instead of just saying, this is how I feel, and it's one way or the other, is to embrace nuance. And so I would ask myself, like, all right, well, do I believe the Second Amendment's important? And be like, yeah, I do, for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe that applies to all forms of possible weaponry?
Yeah.
It's like, now that's an extreme statement to ask yourself, but like, do I believe that the Second Amendment applies to tactical nuclear weapons? And that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but man, do you believe that? It's like, no, I don't. Do I believe that applies to chemical weapons? No. Do I believe, and like, I kind of worked my way down. It's like, okay, well, we can embrace the nuance. And then eventually you might get to the spot where you're like, okay, automatic rifles, like the thing that is kind of a hot button topic right now. How do I feel about that? Like if I was the actual, czar of the universe and I could make the law, do I feel like anybody should there be a certain level of background check to actually hire? Should there be a specific reason why they feel like they need this form of weapon? And these are just good questions to ask yourself about all these topics. Like if I could run healthcare, what would it look like? If I was in charge of immigration policy, what would it look like? And that becomes really, really hard. Really hard. I think about what's going on right now in Ukraine. And I can't imagine if I was President Biden, if I was one of the generals. There's no good answers. There is no good answers in war. And so you're choosing between a lot of bad answers. And there's always unintended consequences for every decision you might make. And so I started to, in 2008, have a lot more grace for our elected leaders and recognizing that they're also human and that they're wrestling with a ton of factors on every side of every decision. And that's the point where I said, I want to prioritize intellectual curiosity in my own politics because I want to grow and learn and develop. But I also want to prioritize that in the person I'm going to cast my ballot for. I want to look for people that I believe have intellectual curiosity. I want to cast my ballot for people that I believe have humility, that they actually will be humble enough to listen to counter points of view, that they're not going to be dogmatic in their party affiliation, that they're, I started to really try to prioritize that in my own personal voting. And so that's one of the things in the book that I really talk about a lot is first, peel back your own perceptions and ask yourself, do I actually believe what I think I believe? Or have I always just believed that because from 16 years old, that's what I heard in my household, or that's the news channel I watched. And then that became the podcast I listened to. And then I've just consumed enough content from the left side or the right side that I just now believe it, not really because I've ever thought deeply about it, but simply because I've consumed enough content that's reaffirmed my existing worldview. And I'll tell you what, Adam, I changed completely, probably about 30% of my perspective on those hot button issues just by thinking deeply about them. Yeah. It was wild. It was uncomfortable. And then I would say my position on almost all the rest of them became far more nuanced, where it wasn't that I completely shifted, but there was a lot more nuance in my position on it. There was a lot more subtlety to it.
It's interesting, but like people, human beings, I think in general, are attracted to simplicity. Like even if we're looking at all the different like personality typing things out there, whether it's,
totally.
Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or, those things exist and are incredibly popular because they simplify something, which is complex human interaction. And people, I think, are really drawn to making things simple. And simple is it's right or it's wrong. Complex requires room for gray and nuance and like all these things. And it's just like, well, that's not easy. That's not simple.
It's really hard.
It is. It's really hard. And maybe that's a principle, or if it's a little too easy or too simple, then maybe maybe that's not a very successful way of looking at certain things.
Yeah, maybe we're not thinking deeply enough about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, so open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity, were those two separate ones, or was that kind of because you said two, so that would be one principle?
I would say that would be the one. Like, so that would be, how do we approach our own journey? And I would say the second big one would be prioritizing character over platform.
Okay.
Because I think that what we've been told in our society is this can be the worst human being in the world that has done horrific things in their own personal life, but they agree with mostly my platform, so I'm going to vote for them. And the thing that I would argue, one, is that once you have actually peeled back the layers of your own personal beliefs from a political perspective, I think you'll find that most of us are not hardcore left or hardcore right. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, and you're going to have a lot of nuanced opinions on things. And what happens is frequently when you get into political discourse with someone that you might not agree with, most of us actually usually agree upon the problems. Like typically, you could have a Democrat and a Republican, and they could both be sitting around complaining about healthcare, saying healthcare costs are out of, like, it is crazy how much healthcare costs right now. Like they price gouge, the insurance could, like, and so now the root of those problems, sometimes we also agree on, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we say the real problem is big pharma, or the big problem is insurance companies, or the problem is just the structure of healthcare in general. We might disagree with the root problems, but a lot of times what happens is we actually agree on the problem that needs to get fixed. You and I might be on different sides of the political spectrum. We might agree that automation and outsourcing is a real issue when it comes to job creation in the United States. Like, that's a real thing. And so I always encourage people when they're trying to think about politics to make sure that they're actually thinking about the very real, very challenging problems our world's facing. Most people think it would be great to go away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. Like, even the most hardcore Republican will say, yeah, I mean, ideally that'd be great, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't cannibalize jobs? Right? Even the most stringent Republican would say, yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, it would be great. And so all of a sudden, like, cool, we have common ground there. So we agree on the problems. What I want in elected leaders is people that are willing to say, you know what? I don't have all the answers. I'm willing to hear ideas from both sides of the aisle. Like, we agree on the problem. Let's talk about solutions. And so I feel, not to stump for my congresswoman, but like, there are so many people in politics that I just really can't stand on both sides of the aisle, sides of the aisle. I like Alyssa Slotkin is my elected member of Congress, and she is fantastic. She is exactly what you would hope a politician would be, which is she is not a hardcore Democrat, hardcore Republican that is someone that says, I am just dogmatic in my stance. She's part of I think it's called the Problem Solvers Caucus, maybe. But it's Republican and Democrats. Like, how do we have common sense solutions to some of the problems that we have? And they're actually a not super popular caucus with the fringe, just like the far left and far right.
Yeah.
Like, they're kind of like, no, we need to put on our armor and, go to battle against the other side. And even in her, when you see her on the campaign trail, when you listen to her hits on Fox News, CNN, wherever she goes, she's never looking to go on the attack and say, this is why Republicans are evil, demonic. That's not her stance ever.
Yeah.
Very much an open-minded, intellectually curious consensus builder. And it's super hard to win that way, but she's thread the needle. She's done it well. And that for me is what I'm looking for out of Congress, people running for Congress, city mayors, local officials, senators, president, is I want folks that have some level of humility where they're going to listen to ideas.
Yeah. Well, I think that could be extracted to, a lot of things when you look at from where you're going to work, right, and your leadership, and you're looking at the character of the person, and maybe prioritizing character over platform. But I think it's character, and it's also and character plays obviously the biggest role in this, but it's their decision making process that you're trying to unlock, right? And that's such a big thing for our podcast in general, because the idea of Inside Great Minds is literally what makes a great mind. What is it that makes a great mind in all these different walks, whether it's business or leadership or politics or music or whatever. There's got to be some common traits that help people become great at what they do. And I think intellectual curiosity, I think, is an incredibly big one across the board for that. And I think what you talk about, which is character, but also, I think in that, how character affects decision-making principles. And I'd be curious if you have a quick comment on decision making, and
Mm.
if there's something specific around what you look for in how someone makes it, and you can keep it into the political vein if you want, of how do you, what is it that you're looking for in their decision making process that makes you feel comfortable?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and just from my background now, I mean, I have run, fairly large organizations for, the last 20 years, and not in the political realm, in the business
Right.
world and sales and different industries. And for me, the biggest things that I always come back to is, one, what we already talked about, which is the intellectual curiosity. I think if someone doesn't have that, I just don't trust their judgment on things because they're unwilling to look outside their own personal experience. I look for a high degree of humility and empathy. And I think that those don't always have to go hand in hand. I think that there are people that are fairly humble, but not always empathetic. And I think there are some people that are fairly empathetic, but also not always the most humble, where it's like, yep, I'm going to listen. I totally understand, but I also know that I know best, and therefore, and I think that having that combination of, I am always going to be considering, and so this is the way I think when I try to make decisions in my own organization, and as I'm training up new leaders myself, I am always trying to emphasize to them, you have to think through every single stakeholder in this decision. You have to actually think through, like, how does this impact? So if you're running a business, how does this decision about deliverables and pricing that we're making right now impact the end consumer? Like, and what's ultimately our mission of our company? Like, is that in alignment with the core values that we have as a company, with the ultimate mission? If you have a huge goal as a company, is what you're doing with those deliverables and price, is that actually in alignment with what your company claims to stand for? How does that impact your employees? How does that impact, at the leadership level, as well as like just at the very ground floor, like thinking through every stakeholder a decision touches. And that takes a high degree of empathy. It takes a high degree of intellectual curiosity and thinking about these things from every single aspect and layer, because it's very easy to only look at one side or the other. Maybe we're just thinking about our customer. We're not thinking about the bottom line. And then all of a sudden you make all these decisions that sound great on paper. You're like, man, we are customer focused. We are serving people. And then we're out of business in 18 months. And, and so you have to make sure you're in a profitable business. And so those are things that I look for. And then I would say that,
well, just even, sorry, don't bookmark your thought there. I was driving in my car the other day, and, all these thoughts come to you sometimes when you're mentally preoccupied with something and your brain drifts. And I remember a similar anecdote about that in the business world. Exactly what you said is what I was thinking about. Is you hear companies say, we are about the customer, and they're fervently about the customer, and maybe that works for them. But oftentimes it's like, who are they discluding in that? Right. And it's like, well, how do their employees feel? And, sometimes it's so much about the customer. Like you've read about, not UPS, I'm sorry. The truck driver, there's a huge article about trucking, and, John Oliver actually is a comedian I watch. He has a, weekly, talked and focused on the trucking business and how, the trucker is overlooked in this, overnight free delivery to the customer. So the customer gets this great experience, but at the cost of truckers having to drive through the night, not being able to be safe. And all of a sudden there's a huge escalation of accidents on the road. And so anyway, I thought that was an interesting anecdote to, are you able to think about all the stakeholders in your decision-making, not just one, because there's a lot of people at play. Yeah, it's really good.
And that's such a good example, Adam, because when we think about it, was your life that much worse when you used to have to wait 2 or 3 days for something to be shipped to you?
Right. Yeah.
My life did not radically get better by getting something the very next day when shipped from Amazon. Now, is it a wow experience? Sure. Is that actually better for society as a whole? Right. And those are the things that sometimes we don't think about, is the trucker. And no, it's such a good example. And I think that with that, this is the part, and this is not to decision-making, this goes to communication from a leadership perspective, which I think if you have a leader who is really sound in their decision-making process, and you have a leader who is a really effective communicator, at every level, whether it's like 2 peers, 2 people they manage, throughout the organization, that's going to be a pretty effective leader. And for me, the communication piece is once you've had that level of intellectual curiosity, once you've done your homework and thought about how does this impact everybody, are you then doing a good job of coming alongside the people in your organization that are going to be impacted by that decision? Are you letting them know ahead of time? Or are you just like, hey, down from on high, we have decreed from management, this is what's happening. And everyone's like, whoa, that totally just changes my entire workday. Versus saying, hey, Adam, here's something we're thinking about rolling out in 6 weeks. I'd love your input on like some of these different things. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, we come back and like, hey, we made a few tweaks to the plan based on your feedback. I think that we're going to move in this direction. And then by the time it's announced across the entire company, this fairly pivotal change, no one's blindsided. Everyone's there and everyone feels like their feedback was heard at every step of the journey. And then there's buy-in across the organization. And I think that's one of the things that for companies, for businesses, but also in politics, I think that's what great politicians do, which is, hey, let's get out there, let's hear, let's listen to the voters, let's actually talk, but then let's go out there and share the message. Like, let's go tell people why we're thinking about doing what we're doing, the thought behind it. And it doesn't always break through, but a lot of times it does. And I think that that's such an important piece in good leadership in general.
Yeah, agreed. I think all those principles are really good. I think really quick, the last one that I absorbed from your book that I talk about a lot in coaching clients and business is the idea that you often have a choice of being right and making something a debate, where in my mind, debate, and this doesn't have to formally be what a debate textbook definition means, but in my mind, when I think of debate, I think of someone winning and someone losing, right?
Yes.
And I think there being a right and a wrong, and the moment a conversation turns into a debate, to me, it's already depending on your intention, right? If your intention is to feel good and win at things, then
Yes.
you can debate all day long, and congratulations. But the cost to that is that you often don't have a lot of friends at the end of those debates, right? Because people don't like to lose. And if every conversation involves a win-loss scenario, so someone's not feeling good at the end of it. And then the ultimate result is you lose influence over folks in general, because you're always trying to win at stuff to other people losing, right? And I read that in your book that, hey, maybe instead of focusing on winning arguments, consider what your actual intention is. And I see so much caustic stuff on social media, especially, where it just seems like the vast majority of people are playing a game of winning things,
yes,
which is just an echo chamber for themselves and nothing else, right? And in business, it costs a tremendous amount of internal company relationships to constantly be right.
No, it's such an important thing, and it's only getting worse because of social media. And it's the hard part is that we crave affirmation. Like, we crave feeling important and valued and seen. And social media gives us this ability to throw an opinion out online. And if you throw out a very caustic opinion, what's going to happen is no hearts are changed, no minds are open. There's going to be the 50% of people that are like, heck yes, like, comment, absolutely. And then we feel good, we feel affirmed. And then there's the other half that is like, that guy's crazy. He's living in a fantasy world. And I really believe that most of our country currently lives in a state of thinking that 50% of the country is brainwashed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the funny part is 100% of the country believes that about the other,
the other half. Yeah.
The fact that all of us believe that is problematic. And so what happens is we get this affirmation. It feels good. Hearts, minds are not opened. Relationships are destroyed on, if you're not in my tribe, then I don't have the time for you. It's basically what we're telling people. And what I found is, and this is one of the reasons why I don't post very much on social media. And if I do, it's usually pretty long, pretty nuanced posts. I mean, we're friends. You've probably seen a bunch of my posts over the years where if I'm going to weigh in on a topic at all, it's basically going to be a blog post, and it's going to be nuance. And it's going to be the type of thing that you could read it and be like, oh, Aaron's trying to play both sides. Like, no, I'm not. I'm trying to actually bring authentic, nuanced thought to a very challenging topic. And the response typically from most people is, thank you so much.
Yeah.
from both sides of the aisle. I'll have people that are hardcore Republicans be like, man, I really appreciate what you just wrote. And I'll have hardcore Democrats that'll do the same thing. And I think that that's what we really want to. And it's not about trying to please everybody. It's about trying to actually think deeply about topics and to understand that there's always another side, and that the other side is probably going to have some piece of their argument that's valid. Like generally, it's not totally crazy what everyone thinks. And we have a tendency to want to lump people into that. But I think the more we can have that, not just in politics, but in leadership in general, and in just our personal relationships, in our friendships, in marriages, I think the more that we can seek to understand why someone feels the way they feel, how they got to that journey, it just is amazing how all of a sudden we feel so much less hostile towards the opinion that they hold. And we realize, oh, okay, that makes sense. I can see that. And then we can have a nice open dialogue. So
there's really another author I really enjoy, although it's a super dense book. Well, yours was actually a very nice, easy read, very digestible. I liked it. The other book is Ray Dalio's Principles, and it's completely different, structure of a book, but incredibly dense. But the things that stuck out to me from that book that relate is he, promotes that inside a very successful business culture. It's very hard to establish, is creating radical honesty and radical open-mindedness. And he says radical honesty is pretty difficult because people often will tell you they don't want the truth to be sugar-coated, but they actually want the truth to be sugar-coated, right? Yes. And about themselves or where they can grow. And but then the other part is, you can only have a radically honest culture if you have a radically open-minded one. And that's the idea that just as direct as you are with people, you also have to be completely open to hearing things and contemplating things intellectually before passing judgment on them, right? And I think that's even if what was accepted outside of the business office and a general culture was radical open-mindedness, I think that would lead to a lot, in terms of a principle, right?
Well, and I'll tell you what also with that is a desire as a society to become better communicators. And I know it sounds funny, but the reality is you don't have to. I can give you very direct, very hard truth that might not be quote unquote sugar-coated. And yet that doesn't mean that I have to be a jerk about it.
Right.
Because I can give it to you in such a way that you leave feeling, man, like Aaron just really cares about me. And he really wants to see me grow and develop. And this isn't because he used some tactic he read about in a communication book where he sandwiched it with praise. And it's like, Adam, you're great at this. Here's a giant, terrible thing. But man, I love to give you a pat on the back, because we've all had those conversations where like that felt like a tactic. It's more of just a genuine posture of your heart. And I think that that's for me where I can give someone I work with or someone I'm mentoring outside of work hard truth where it is radical honesty. But if we come from a place of compassion and empathy, and we do try to seek to understand where they're coming from first before delivering what can sometimes be uncomfortable, hard truth, it's amazing how the way that we present it, while not sugar-coated, is still more digestible because they feel like, man, Adam really understands what's going on in my life. He is really seeking to help me. And I so appreciate that he was willing to tell me what he just told me, because most friends would not. And I think that that's the thing that some people swing the pendulum so far where they're like, I don't sugarcoat anything. It's like, yeah, but you're kind of a jerk who lost all influence because you didn't actually attempt to not sugarcoat, but you didn't attempt to empathize. You didn't attempt to ask questions first. You didn't attempt to actually dig in and understand why behind the action. You just came in with a hammer. And I think that that's the piece that so often people need to find that happy medium, which is, in my mind, again, starting with the posture of your heart towards that person and recognizing that everyone's got a story.
Yeah. It's really good. We're just a personal learning experience in business, right? You run the kind of the sales organization now for the publishing school. Prior, you ran a large sales organization at Southwestern. You've done things in between. In your time running organizations and working with people, where did you learn a couple of these kind of maybe principle-based hard lessons in practice?
Yeah, I had two amazing coaches and mentors that really shaped so much of this for me. And I think probably one of the two. So Chris Samuels and Kevin Johnson, who you know both of well. And there was things I learned from each. And so I think that with Chris, he did an amazing job of modeling this behavior. I'm not sure I've ever heard Chris say a negative word about anybody. Like in terms of having a no gossip culture, I don't know if I've ever heard Chris, even like a passing, like not even in a way, because sometimes we'll talk about someone not in a gossipy way. Maybe you and I are just talking about someone that we want to help improve and grow.
Yeah.
I can't remember a time where, and so he modeled that so well. He also was not afraid to bring up areas of growth for me, but he always did it with a smile. He always did it with that Chris Samuels, man, smile, laugh, just,
yes.
And I never felt attacked, but there were so many times where he would bring up something and I would feel like he was wrong. I was very close-minded in my early 20s. Like I thought that I was quite a bit better at most things than I actually was. And he would just be firm, like, listen, Aaron, I'm just telling you, if you want to accomplish the goals, he always brought it back to my why. He always brought it back to what I was trying to accomplish. And he knew me deeply enough that he could bring it back to why I was doing what I was doing. If you want to accomplish that, I'm just telling you, it's an area you're going to have to grow in. 2-3 weeks later, without fail, I'd always look back at the conversation and be like, dang it, Chris was right again. And it was just like, It helped me realize that if I have hard conversations with people I lead, it doesn't always have to feel great at the end of the conversation. Hopefully it doesn't feel terrible, but it doesn't have to feel amazing. It doesn't have to be warm and flowery.
Yeah.
They might 2 weeks later be like, dang it. Yeah, Aaron was right. And so he did such a great job modeling that. Kevin Johnson, I think what I learned from him was the power of humor in leadership and how important it is to be able to mix in really solid principle-based leadership and still keep it light. And I think that that's such a skill set that if you have the ability to have an organization where there's laughter, an organization where people feel comfortable just in their own skin, and they never view you as this top-down leader of like, oh gosh, I don't want to bring in, if they can see the joy that you just bring every single day, there's power in being able to make someone laugh. There's power in being able to lighten the mood at the right moment where you can kind of feel that it's starting to get tense in the room, and just that quick little quip, that quick little moment that then makes everyone realize, okay, yeah, we're all on the same team here, and you just kind of move forward. And I think he's probably the most effortless leader I've ever met, where a combination of absolute brilliance, where just strategically he's off the charts, intellect, ability to see like future vision casting off the charts, and also like tactically helping people improve at exact things they need to improve at, he's off the charts. But then the ability to lead in such a way that no one ever feels attacked, less than, insecure, and that he's always keeping a light mood within your one-on-one conversations, but also across. Probably one of the most effortless, talented leaders that I've ever had a chance to work with. And I got to work with him for quite a few years. So I think a lot of success that I've had in leadership is very directly attributed to those two.
Yeah, agreed. Those are brilliant examples, and you become a great example too. I mean, if there's one way to kind of wrap this up with some advice to our audience, and I ask this often in kind of different ways for folks, but I'll ask this in a kind of a unique way for you because of your unique ability to give this advice. As being a dad of Four. Sorry, I'm always one off.
No, it's like we keep having them, so it's it's easy to get one off. Yeah.
So a dad of 4, an amazing wife who works incredibly hard as a nurse, and then yourself doing regional, sales management work. What's the advice that you would give for busy people who want to write something and have thought about writing something and putting it in a book form? Like if you could just give them one thing, maybe one idea that as a busy person, how do you, and you have a desire to write something, what's your one piece of advice for them?
Yeah. Well, I think that it starts with you, and I'm going to give you the advice. It starts with making the decision that's important enough to do it. And I know that sounds simple, but so often in life, we have this list of things that we're going to do one day. And I would encourage everyone to do something I did a little ways back, is create your anti-bucket list, which is things that I am deciding to never do in my life.
Yeah.
I have one. So as an example, I will never run a marathon. Never going to do it. And the reason why is because for a long time, I thought about running a marathon. I was like, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do it. It's like, you know what? I'm never going to have time to do that. I have 4 kids, a busy job. I'm never going to run a marathon. And by saying I'm never going to do things, it allows you to actually say yes to other things. And so for me, saying, is writing a book something that is so on your heart that you're like, you know what? If 10 years from now I haven't written this stupid book, I'm going to be so mad at myself. I feel like I have a story to share. I feel like I have a message for the world. I feel like it's important enough to do. That's the first step, is actually committing to doing it. As simple as that sounds, like just make the decision you're going to do it. But then from there is get much more organized with your writing time. So what I mean by that is 2 things. One is you have to just put it on your calendar and then honor it. It's got to be important enough for you. So for me, during that 2-week sprint, I woke up an hour earlier than I normally do. And from 5:36 a.m. until I finished the chapter, I was writing. And so I was writing till 8, 9 o'clock. But the way I was able to write so quickly is I got hyper organized with my thoughts first. So I had done a mind map of everything I want to include in the book. So I had it broken down of all the main topics, all of the, hey, here's mine was faith-based. So some Bible verses, some principles I want to include, some stories, some anecdotes from my own life. And so each chunk of ideas was pretty well fleshed out. Then I organized that into chapters and said, all right, this is what's going in chapter 1. And then what I would do each morning before I started writing chapter 1 is I took out a fresh sheet of paper, took all those ideas from my main mind map, put them onto my chapter 1 mind map and said, what else? What else belongs in here? And then before I wrote a single word, I outlined the chapter. Say, all right, I'm going to lead off with this story to kind of set the stage. Then I'm going to go into this principle that I'm going to talk about. Then I'm going to share this Bible verse. Then I'm going to go into this story. Then I'm going to go in, and I would outline what I was going to write for about 15 or 20 minutes. So I get a pretty good outline of where is this story heading. If you do that, your writing is so much faster because you're never asking yourself, it's just you get hyper organized first and then start. And then I would encourage people to do 1 of 2 things. If you're someone that likes sitting at the keyboard and typing, sit at the keyboard and type. That's how I am. I love doing that.
Yeah.
Some people that are listening to this podcast episode might actually be way better at speaking than writing. And you say, hey, Aaron, get me on a podcast and we can talk all day long and I can share my thoughts or over a cup of coffee. That person, I would really recommend just doing talk to text and just speak your chapter and then use a dictation software. There's a ton of them out there where you can actually just have that put in, and then you can go through and edit. And you can say, okay, that was a little run on, that was a little bit. But for any people that are more comfortable talking than writing, just speak to text. You'll literally finish your chapter in 10, 15 minutes because most chapters of a book are not much longer than that when read out loud. And then you can go through and edit. But from there, this is the last thing. Don't edit while you write. Have a terrible rough draft at the end. Like have a, what we call a self-publishing school, a rough draft. Because then you can go through and edit. But where people get stuck is they're 3 chapters in and they turn to perfectionists about their first 3 chapters. So then they never finish their draft. So if you'll make that decision, I'm going to do it. You'll get organized with your thoughts before you start writing, and then just write. Don't go back and edit until the whole thing's done. All of a sudden you'll look up in a couple weeks or a couple months and you'll have a draft in your hands. And then you're close enough where now there's momentum. You can actually see the finish line a little bit more. And that's when it gets exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you did that in a very consolidated way. That was very good advice. Thank you. Guys, if you're listening to this episode, The Politically Homeless Christian by Aaron Schafer, great read. It was actually really, from all the business literature I read, it was a kind of a refreshing just break from that, and with some great principles that I think are life applicable, but directed in an environment that is important right now, which is politics and being able to listen and how you take your own personal values and apply it. So get a chance to read that. And then if you want to follow Mr. Schafer himself, are you posting most on what forum? LinkedIn, Facebook? If you're going to post something, where are you putting it these days?
Yeah, if I'm going to post something, I would say usually Facebook. So I have a Facebook page. I think it's going to be linked in the show notes. AaronSchafer.com is just my blog. And so I need to get back into blogging more frequently, but that'll be a good place to follow. Okay. Well, we'll post those links for you, man. And I appreciate you coming on here. This was a really awesome conversation, and always great spending time with someone who thinks just like the way my brain works. I feel like is how we both operate. So that's always a fun conversation to have. So really, really rewarding. And we'll catch up again soon. I appreciate it. Thanks, Adam.